Hello, greater educators. Welcome to the Director's Podium. I'm your host, Adam Christie. Our guest today is one of the United Kingdom's leading educationalists. He is in great demand as a teacher, composer, and writer. He has written over, get this, 600 books, and his inspirational masterclasses and workshops continue to influence thousands of young musicians and teachers all over the world in both the principles and practice of musical performance and education. You can see him on Facebook, Twitter, and his website, paulharristeaching.co.uk. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming this magnificent person, Paul Harris. Paul, thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you, Adam. It's absolutely lovely to be with you. Thanks so much for the invitation.
10 o'clock where you're at, it's only 3 where I'm at, so we really appreciate you staying up late with us.
No, it's okay. I might stay up late virtually every night. This is early for me. It's absolutely fine.
Oh, great. So you're a night owl.
I pretty much am, actually. Yes, I'd say so.
Awesome. Well, Paul, would you tell us what made you want to be a teacher in the first place?
Well, it's a good question. And I think, like many teachers, it was my own teacher, one particular teacher particularly, which was my clarinet teacher at school, who turned out to be the same teacher I had when I went to the Royal Academy of Music. John Davis, his name was, an absolutely superb teacher, a man who had enormous wisdom, enormous generosity, a wonderful sense of humor, and drew you in absolutely to the subject that he was teaching. And pretty much from the word go, I kind of felt, this is what I want to do. I want to do this as well. Because I think we are very inspired by people that move us, people that mean a lot to us somehow or another. And we want to be the same. That's certainly how I felt. And so from really quite early on in my life, I wanted to be a teacher, and not a day has gone by when I regret that decision. I mean, I do many things as well. I do lots of playing and lots of writing, as you suggested, but teaching is absolutely at the core of what I do.
That's awesome. Paul, how would you say, and I don't know how much you know about the U.S. education system, but how would you say that the U.K.'s education system is different than the United States?
Okay, well, I do know a fair bit, actually. I've been to the States a good number of times, actually. I've lost count. The last time I was over with you was it beginning of last year, I think. I was speaking at an enormous music education conference down in Texas, in San Antonio. I don't know whether you know that conference. It was absolutely enormous. I think there were about 29,000 people there. I've spoken at other conferences. I've been to the States, as I say, a few times. And I don't think our systems are that much different, actually. I think when it comes down to actually teaching students to play instruments, for example, there are many similarities. I think there are some differences. Your band method, where a lot of orchestral instruments are taught in larger groups. We do the band method as well, actually. We have taken on the American band method, and in a number of schools and areas we use it to some extent. I think one of the major differences is probably the exam system. We are very much entrenched in what we call grade exams, and there are 3 or 4, maybe 5 exam boards, and many teachers teach 2 exam syllabuses. And there are certain good things about that, certain not so good things about that, which maybe we can talk about. And I know for a fact that it's very rarely used in the States. And I applaud you for this, actually, because I think teaching without exams as a constant part of the progress is a good thing. But I think a lot of what we do is actually really rather similar.
Now, we got the chance to perform with the King Singers when I was in college. And
Right.
one thing that surprised me about performing with them was that they said they really don't warm up as a group. Is that a common thing there?
No, I wouldn't say so. Not at all. I think for performances, we go to a lot of trouble to warm up. Actually,
Hmm.
as far as I know, most ensembles, choirs, definitely, individuals, we have very significant warm-up routines. Certainly, I teach very significant warm-up routine to my pupils. In my every single lesson I teach, I have quite a warm-up routine, because personally, and I think many people would agree that it's essential for getting the body and the mind into a good state to have a good lesson, to have a good performance.
Hmm.
So I would say that was unusual.
So they do warm up as a group then.
I would have thought so. I'm surprised to hear you say that. I think most groups, most ensembles, most individuals warm up,
Well,
whether it's for performance or lessons.
they're the king singers, so I'm assuming they can do whatever they want, I
I
guess.
think so. I think they are the exception that proves the rule.
Um, Paul, what would you say, in your opinion, motivates students?
First of all, maybe I'd like to say it's very important that a student understands what they're doing. If you know what you're doing, then you want to do it. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm supposed to be doing for my practice. I know what I'm supposed to be doing next in this lesson. There is more chance that I'm going to do it as a result. And so, in both a micro and a macro kind of way, that is going to motivate a student. If I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, if I don't really understand it, then I don't feel motivated to do it. I feel quite uncomfortable about doing it. And whether that's whatever it is, whether it's a small thing or a big thing. So I think the first thing really is that our students must know what they are about to do, the next thing they're going to do. Because if they do, then they're more likely to do it, and they're more likely to do it with an open heart, an open mind, and some enthusiasm. That's the first thing. Um, I want my students to feel good about themselves. Um, when they do something, I want them to feel, I did that. I did that well. I know what I was supposed to be doing. In a lesson context, I understood what my teacher just asked me to do. I understand why they just asked me to do that. I did it, and it makes me feel good. When we do something and it makes us feel good, the brain releases positive endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, these things. And these chemicals, they're feel good chemicals, like having a piece of chocolate. Chocolate releases the same endorphins. We literally feel good. These chemicals make us feel good. And that motivates us. If we do something and we feel good, that is motivating. And maybe my third point here is that it's very important that I feel I'm making progress. If I feel I'm making progress, that's going to motivate me to move on to the next thing. And so this is very, very much up to the teacher to ensure that their pupil, their student, is always making progress in some form or another. Now, this may be, bigger forms of progress, like, for example, an exam. I pass an exam. But I think that's very, or let me say that's less important. I examine for quite a well-known exam board in the UK, and I like the exam system. And I don't think I would say anything that the people that run it would argue with. But I don't think that is the most important representation of progress. To me, progress is something that can happen continuously as we are learning, as we are teaching, and or that you can't quantify progress in the sense as, how many progresses did you make in today's lesson? You can't say, oh, I made 25 progresses, because that's not the way we think. But I think at the end of a lesson, we can be aware that we have made a lot of progress. And in fact, I think it's very much part of good teaching to give our pupils activities to do in the lesson, at which, after they've done it, we can say to our student, you've just got that, you've just understood that, you have made some progress. We don't absolutely have to say that every time. That would be, ridiculous. We just wouldn't be saying that all the time. But we may say it a few times, And as a result, our pupils begin to get into that mindset where they think, yes, I've made progress again. Everything I do in this lesson, I'm doing to the best of my ability. I understand it. I am making these little incremental bits. And in fact, maybe I can count them up. At the end of this lesson, we did, maybe it was 30 minutes. Every minute we did one activity and I got it. I got that activity. Therefore, I made 30 bits of progress. I'm giving you not a sensible example there, but you can see what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that is very motivating because if our pupil is aware that they are making progress, they are very motivated. So I'm sure I could give you some other ideas, but for the moment, I think there are three pretty strong ways of motivating our pupils, motivating our students.
And would you say those are timeless, or would you say that those are pretty recent?
Um, timeless in the sense of, have they always existed?
Yeah. Have their
Uh,
motivations changed over the years?
well, that's a very interesting and quite a deep question, Adam. And we could spend the whole of this session just talking about that, actually, because I think the answer to that, to some extent, yes, it is yes. And my fundamental philosophy for teaching is to be as inclusive as possible, in the sense that I want all my pupils to enjoy their learning and to make as much progress individually as they can. I think there was a time in teaching, and there still is, to be honest, and this is to some extent geographical. Um, Certain countries, I think, have a more severe kind of approach to teaching. I won't say which.
And what do you mean
And
by that? What do you mean by severe approach?
a more severe approach where teachers are more rigid in their approach.
Hmm.
They are more authoritarian
Okay.
in their approach, and they have a kind of philosophy, which I have to say that I don't really agree with. Kind of philosophy that says, this is how I teach. I know it's a good way of teaching. My good students get it, and the others, my bad students, don't get it. And I think the time has come, and very much now, in our pandemic period, very much now, we have to put that aside. We have to put that behind us. We have to say, here are my pupils, and I want them all of them, to progress, to move forward, to be motivated, each in their different kind of ways. And I think, in a sense, yes, maybe what I'm saying is a diet, is a recipe for motivation that is very much of our time. But having said that, it's always been there. And my teacher, John Davis, who I was taught since I was the age of 9, and other teachers who I experienced when I was a child, also, I know, had that particular philosophy, which I've learnt from.
This will be my 9th year teaching, and it seems that their motivations have changed just slightly, but I would say they are a little bit different, just because I think kids are different now for some reason than they were 8 or 9 years ago, and I think that is partially due to their motivations slightly changing. A lot of it has to do with technology that factors into motivation somehow.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, we have to acknowledge that we live in what some people call the digital age. And young people today are absolutely very different from the very recent past. I would say that young people today are different from young people 5 years ago, significantly different. We have to take into account that we have this technology, this technological age in which we live, that young people, actually all people, like playing computer games. And there's a whole lot of stuff that I could tell you about that the computer game um, uh, life has thrown into our thinking, as well as all sorts of other. We want things now. Everything has to be so much more immediate.
Mm.
We make comparisons. My friend's got a better mobile phone than me. My friend's had an upgrade and I haven't had it yet. We make these comparisons all the time. Our expectations are different. So yes, I think we do live in a very different time now, and we have to adapt our teaching to the time in which we live.
Do you think let's just imagine for a second that we had the possibility, we were given the choice of you could choose in education to go fully without technology, back to paper and pencil, no cell phones, no computers, no anything. It's back to encyclopedias and books, or you could continue in the path of technology. What would you choose?
Well, if I was really allowed to choose, I would choose a bit of both.
Oh,
I would take the best of both worlds.
hmm.
And I always want to try to take the best of the world in which I'm living in. And so I take the best of both because I think there are lots of wonderful things that teachers from the past, the recent past, the more distant past, gave us to understand, to learn from. And there's a lot of wonderful things that we can take out of the development of technology today, and I hope that I and other people that may think similarly would want to say, well, let's take the best out of both worlds. Let's make our world today the best that we can, taking some from both of those that you've just described, Adam.
What would you say are three practical things that would make a teacher better?
Three practical things that would make a teacher better. Thank you. Let me have a go. Um, well, I think I think the first thing I'd like to say is that we have to be very self-aware. And I think we have to try to teach ourselves to become more self-aware. Sadly, I observe a lot of people who are not as self-aware as I would like them to be. What I mean by that, Adam, I think, is aware of the effect that they are having on the people that they are working with. And in other words, I suppose I'm talking about empathy. And I see a lot of people behave in ways where I'm thinking, is this person really aware of the effect of what they are doing or what they are saying on the person to whom they are doing or saying that to? And I can only assume, I can only conclude that they're probably not, because what I think they're doing is not maybe the best in that particular situation. So I think that's the first thing. I would like us to look inwards and be more self-aware. But what I mean specifically is about our behavior in a particular situation. And of course, what we're talking about this evening is teaching. That's my number one, really, really important point. Number two, and forgive me for this, but I would like to say, well, maybe I've developed a form of teaching, which I call simultaneous learning,
There we
which you may
go.
know about.
There it
Yeah,
is.
so forgive me, but I've been developing this over many years now. I've done some books on it, and it's not a kind of teaching that is new. It's kind of taking the best, I think, from existing teaching, and there are certain principles there within it. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this, Adam, but just the three principles are that we teach through the ingredients of a piece, we make connections all the time, and we are proactive. They are the three main principles. And I think and many people have spoken to me about this system of teaching over the years. I've been talking about it. I've been talking about it all over the world. People feed back to me all the time, and again, forgive me for saying, but on the whole, their reaction is it does actually help them to teach more effectively. And so I would maybe suggest that if people want to think about it, to read up about it, and just to explore what I mean by this kind of teaching, you may find that does help to be better. I suppose in a nutshell, it takes us away from the kind of teaching where we say, you play to me, you sing to me, and I'll tell you where you went wrong. Which ultimately is a rather a negative kind of teaching. It's rather tedious, and I think it's quite exclusive, because there are a certain number of pupils that will be okay with that, but lots won't, and ultimately those people will give up because they think, well, my lesson is really my teacher telling me where I'm going wrong all the time. So that's my second point. And my third point is, I think, and particularly today, more than ever before, we have to teach unconditionally. And that is actually my next book. It's going to be called Teaching Unconditionally, or Unconditional Teaching. I haven't decided yet. And really, it's a kind of teaching. Well, I'll tell you where this came from. A couple of years ago, I had a serious illness. I had cancer, which I am completely recovered from, I'm glad to say. I had a cancer called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a blood cancer of the lymph system. And I got very friendly with a lot of my doctors and consultants, and we often spoke. And I remember very specifically asking my main consultant this question. I said, "Are all medics unconditional?" And he thought for a moment, and he said, "Well, yes. At least that is absolutely what we are supposed to be." And it made me think, are all teachers unconditional? And I'm afraid the answer that I came to and still have is no, by no means. We are conditional. And we are conditional on lots and lots of things, which is what my book is going to be about. This whole series of things. An example, practice. Some teachers say, well, as long as you practice, I'll teach you. They don't necessarily say it as boldly as that, but that's what's in their mind. Oh, you haven't practiced, it's not worth me teaching you. And then there's a whole other raft of conditions that we create in our teaching. And really, I want us to really think about those conditions. I'm not saying that they're not all, some of them are good, some of them are important. Conditions in life are important in certain cases. But on the whole, when we're teaching, I think I want us to move more to that medic way of thinking of being unconditional. So there are my 3 points. Be more self-aware, be more empathetic, have a look at this simultaneous learning way of teaching, and be unconditional.
Okay, so you talked about unconditional teaching. Let's look at this in the sense of, say, a math teacher. A math teacher, because we hopefully have a lot of teachers that are not just music teachers listening. How would a math teacher teach unconditionally?
Do you mean in a classroom of 30 students?
Right. And I'm assuming, as I think of what my rules that I have for my room are basically my conditions that if you follow these, it's going to be so great. It's going to be such an amazing experience. And when that falls, when those rules are broken, the only reason that they're rules is because those are the best conditions to learn, I think. So is that what you're talking about teaching unconditionally?
Yes, to some degree. That anything where we impose conditions, I want us to think carefully about those conditions. And that's why I said just a moment ago that some conditions are necessary. If we go to the zoo, the people will let us into the zoo on the condition that we don't jump in the cage with an animal, with a tiger, because the likelihood is we're going to be eaten by that tiger. So those kind of boundaries, those kind of conditions are very useful. But at the same time, there are a whole raft of conditions that maybe in our minds, more psychological kind of conditions, that I just want us to question all the time. For our maths teacher, particularly our maths teacher teaching in a classroom of 30, that the whole raft of conditions are going to be very different. I expect what I'm thinking about in my own mind is teaching music to a smaller group of people, maybe one individual or a group of 2 or 3, which of course is very different compared to being in a classroom. But I think what I would like to say is, let's think deeply about what our conditions are, whether they are affecting the way that we teach, and whether there may be potential for changing them or developing them or thinking about it in a different way. I suppose what I'm really getting at is, do we have any conditions there that block our pupils' progress? And observing teachers, as I do quite a lot, I do see teachers setting up conditions that ultimately block their pupils'
And
progress.
what would
And
some of those be?
Well, for example, the one that I mentioned, I'll only teach you if you've practiced, if you've done your homework.
Mhm.
If you haven't, then you're not worth teaching. Um, uh, I'll only teach you if you learn at a good speed. This is the speed I'd like my pupils to learn, and you don't learn at that speed. Therefore, I feel rather frustrated that you're not living up to that particular condition of mine, or I have certain expectations. Um, and you're not fulfilling those expectations. That's a condition in my mind. Um, or all sorts of things, that a pupil may behave in a particular kind of way that doesn't meet an expectation in our mind, and therefore subconsciously it becomes a condition. We may never have thought about it, but it may become a condition that then blocks that teaching as it moves forward.
You wrote a book. You just talked about you having cancer and you being cancer free, and congratulations on that. That's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
Um, what did cancer teach you about yourself, and what did it teach you about teaching?
Well, what did it teach me about myself? It taught me, I think, more than anything else, to take nothing for granted. I don't take anything for granted anymore. We wake up in the morning and the sun is shining, I hope, or that it's light, it's bright, and there's a day for us. And I was given between 60 and 70% chance of survival over that cancer. A lot of people die with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that's quite a leveling thought to be faced with for a good few months. My treatment lasted about 6 months, and I began not to take anything for granted. When you have chemotherapy, it hits you like a bulldozer, and you lose your strength, you lose your capacity to think for part of that time. I mean, I had 3 weekly cycles, and the first week or so, I was in a bit of a bad place. And I was looking out and I was watching people with energy moving around and doing all the things that I wanted to do, things I took for granted. And I stopped taking those things for granted. Um, all the things that we do take for granted, let's not take them for granted. Let's think it's wonderful that I've just had that wonderful conversation with someone. I've just given a lesson. What an honor, what a privilege it is to give someone a lesson, whatever it happens to be. I've just walked down the street, I've just driven somewhere, I've just eaten a meal. These are all things, and there are many, many others that so many of us take for granted. I stopped taking those things for granted. I started to be much more aware, which makes me feel much better about everything. That's what I learned. I learned many other things. That's one thing I'd say I learned about myself. But and what about my teaching? Well, I learned that we can learn every day. Every day is an opportunity for more learning, and I think the cancer period really brought that very strongly up in my mind. Every day we must learn. I learned that the essence of our personality, and again, this is only my opinion, of course, and maybe psychiatrists, psychologists would say different things, but I think maybe the essence of our personality is how we react. We are how we react. When I think back to going back to John Davis, my wonderful teacher at school and at the Royal Academy of Music, he had a wonderful way of reacting to situations, to uh, people. And that's who he was. And when I remember, John died about 5 years ago.
Hmm.
And when I think of him, what I think about is, not necessarily his voice or what he taught me. I think about how he reacted in situations, because that's what I learned so much about. And during the cancer, that thought, that whole kind of area of thought became so much stronger in my mind. So the way we react, I think, is so very important. Um, we want to also realize, and this is something else I learned from the cancer, when you become very seriously ill, you basically lose control. You're not in control of your life anymore. We are all in control of our life to some degree. When you're seriously ill, you lose that control. You put your life in the hands of other people. They are now in control of your life. You know, they are responsible for saving your life if it's going to work. And you have to take hundreds of pills, and you have to go and have your treatment on a regular basis and all this stuff. And I think we like being in control. But what I learnt is that I could still remain in some control at the same time as having to go with the flow. You have to go with the flow when you're ill. You can't do anything other than go with the flow. But you can remain in a certain amount of control. And when we're teaching, as teachers, we like to remain in control. All teachers like to be in control. But I think the great thing to learn as a teacher is to still be in control and yet go with the flow. Here is this particular student. They are learning at this particular speed. May not be a speed that I like, but it may not be a speed that any of my other pupils or students learn at, but this is their speed. This is how they learn. This is how I feel this particular lesson is moving forward. It's not necessarily what I planned or how I've done it with other pupils, other students, but this is how this particular lesson seems to be moving forward. I am going with the flow. I'm still remaining in control, but I'm going with the flow. And I think if we can, as it were, get those two great forces to come together, go with the flow and yet stay in control, I think we have mastered the art of teaching.
So, would you tell us about the day you were diagnosed? How'd you find out?
Um, I've never been ill in my life until that point. I've had cold and that kind of thing. I've never been ill at all, and I had some uncomfortable stomach pain. So I went to my local doctor. Luckily, and I owe my life to this man, I think, because he could have said, "Oh, come back in a month's time and see how you're feeling." Luckily, on that first day I went to him, he said, "Oh, let's go and do tests." So I had about a month of tests, and then I got my diagnosis, and it was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was stage 3. And stage 3 is quite an advanced stage of that cancer. So had he said come back in a month, that might have been it for me. But how did I feel when I was told that, given that diagnosis? That's an interesting question, Adam. I felt very philosophical about it. I thought, okay, this is where I am. I've been diagnosed with cancer. I've got cancer. I'm going to defeat it. I didn't think it was a battle, but I thought, I'm going to defeat this. I'm going to remain positive. I'm a very positive person anyway, but I thought, I'm going to remain positive through this, and I'm going to defeat it. And I'm not. And this was an interesting point as well. And I felt this very, very early on. I'm not going to be the victim. I'm not going to play the victim. I'm oh no, this is the most terrible thing that's ever happened to me. I didn't want to ever go to that kind of place. I've got it. I can't not have it. I'm going to see this thing through in the most positive way possible.
So you didn't think this was a death sentence for you at all?
No, even though I was told right up front, you have a 60 to 70% chance of survival. I was going on the highest point of survival there, and I wasn't going to entertain the idea that I wasn't going to come through it.
Well, I'm so glad you did. What would you say are your weaknesses as an educator, and how did you compensate for those? Because I think every educator has their weaknesses, and the question is how do you work past those? How do you find ways to compensate for that? What were your weaknesses, and how did you compensate?
Okay, that's a very probing question, Adam.
Sorry, you want me to say mine first?
No, it's okay. It's okay. Well, because of course, the flip side of that is because one always makes one's weaknesses one's strengths. That's how one deals with it. And okay, I'm going to be honest with you.
Great.
And first of all, I think, without a doubt, that I certainly in my youth, in my childhood, I was a slow learner. I was a slow learner, and I've speeded up, I think, a little bit as time's gone by, but I was definitely a slow learner. I never was top of the class. I was always near the bottom, and I never did well at exams. But that taught me something very, very much, because that people believed in me, and I was very grateful that to the people that did believe in me, even though I was clearly a slow learner, and that has taught me an awful lot about teaching. What's so important is that we believe in our pupils somehow or another, and we teach them to believe in themselves. So I think that was, I don't know whether you'd call it a weakness. I wouldn't call it a weakness now. A slow learner is not a weakness. It's just how you are. But when I was a slow learner, it was considered to be a weakness. When I was at school, I was bottom of the class, and that wasn't so good. A more recent weakness is that I'm a bit of a workaholic, and I do tend to work all hours of the day and night, and I kind of recognize that maybe around about the cancer time, and I haven't slowed down, but I've tried to be a bit more sensible, let's say, in the way that I work. I don't know whether you'd say working too hard is a weakness, but maybe it is, because maybe it didn't give me enough time to go outside and enjoy all the beautiful things in the world, which I do more so now, actually. Maybe, I don't know. It's a difficult question, and I'd like to talk to you again maybe in the future, and having thought about that even more.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely. As we wrap up our interview, Paul, what encouragement or inspiration do you have for our listening educators?
Okay, well, I think I've said one or two of the points already, really. And one I've just really said, which is, let's teach our pupils to believe in themselves. Our best teachers have taught us to believe in ourselves. I think that's the greatest thing that we can do for our students. Teach them to believe in themselves. And through doing that, or in doing that, we must always be kind. We must always be kind to our pupils. Personally, I don't think there's any place for unkindness. And I see it in the world. We all see it in the world. I don't know what the advantages of it. Be kind and teach our pupils, our students, to believe in themselves. And remember this really hugely important thing. As teachers, we are doing the most important job in the world. There is no doubt in my mind about that, because we are creating the future. We are creating the next generation of people who will be the future. And it seems to me, Adam, that on the whole, we don't learn from history. We don't learn from our mistakes. I'm talking about a macro thing, because we continually make the same mistakes again and again. But let's try not to do that. Let's try to learn from the past. Let's remember that what we're doing, if we do it at our best, is the most important job in the world.
Awesome. And one more time, where can they connect with you at, Paul?
Well, please do. I love people doing so if they can. I have my website, which you've said. If you come to my website, there is a little contact thing at the in one of the top corners, and you can literally just send me an email. Anyone can send me an email any time of the night or day, and be guaranteed I will respond. I always love responding to people, teachers, anyone who has something to share, question to ask, a thought to share, whatever. I will always respond. And please do contact me.
Awesome. And again, that website is paulharristeaching.co.uk. You can see him on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks so much for being with us today, and we give a thank you and a pod nod, Paul, for your time and your message. You can watch bonus material from Paul's interview on YouTube or our website in a segment called The Curtain Call. It's just a looser conversation that by the end of it, you really feel like you know our guest really well. And again, you can see that on YouTube or our website, www.thedirectorspodium.com. My name is Adam Christie. You've been here with Mr. Paul Harris, and we'll catch you on our next episode on The Director's Podium.